Hey everybody, so in this video I'm going to be going over the beginner challenges for the Down Under CTF 2024. And what I'm going to do, since they're beginner, I figure if you're watching this video, it's probably because you're new to either the web portion of CTFs or maybe hacking in general. So I'm going to try and kind of explain it in terms of somebody. My audience is essentially just going to be somebody who's like new to this, so I'm going to talk more or try to talk more about like the kind of beginner things. Hopefully this video is not too long, but I haven't actually tried these challenges yet. I thought it'd be valuable just to like attack them like fresh, without already knowing what's going to happen. And then also, I don't know, maybe I'll just ramble for a while to like try and help impart my my incredible wisdom and expertise. I'm laughing because I don't really have either of those things. I mean, I have some, but anyway. So hopefully I'm actually able to do these or I'll look really dumb. Although I guess I assume if I can't do them, then I won't upload this video. So if you're actually listening to this, then it means I was successful. So yay me. Anyway, so if you're new to these kind of in general, the way it works is you're given sort of a website that we're going to try and find some kind of vulnerability, and we're going to exploit it in order to get a flag. And often, let's see what it is. Often you get the source code as well. So here is the website, and then this would be the source code. So with access to the source code, it would be what's called a white box, where essentially just means we have access to the source code, as opposed to black box, which we don't have access to the source code. And one of the things I really like about like CTFs, web CTFs, and sites like Hack the Box and stuff is often you're given the source code itself, which I think is really helpful because from a skill building perspective, because one, it builds your skill in reading code, which is a very valuable skill to have. And two, like it lets you see kind of like how, I don't know, how the sausage is made. I mean, I guess it gives you an idea into like what's actually happening that is creating these exploits and these or these vulnerabilities, which you can then exploit. I don't know. Anyway, so code is good, I guess, basically is what I'm trying to say. So if we look at the site, and first thing I'm going to do, because it's a beginner challenge, is view the source code. Often, I mean, I've seen beginner ones where they literally just have a code comment with the flag in it. So kind of helping a beginner understand like, hey, like the code is like just what you see on the page isn't, you know, there's stuff behind the scenes. It doesn't look like there's any here. This is just a pretty simple site, just some CSS, which kind of helps with the formatting and how it's going to be displayed, and just an input form. And I'm going to guess from the name of everything and the fact that we're submitting stuff, it's given that it's named Parrot, I'm assuming it's just going to parrot back to us. So it looks like we just enter something and it repeats it. Let me try. So actually, so this kind of is worthless. I guess I should say why. But so what I'm going to try and do is we're going to see if it renders HTML. So you could get something like a cross-site scripting vulnerability, which is one of the first things you often learn about when you're learning about web exploitation. And so what I tried to do was get it to render HTML, and it's not. So what's happening is it's probably being sanitized or output encoding. So you see these here. So this is what's called HTML encoding. So the website itself is just like this file, right? And your browser is what puts all these pieces together and makes it look the way it looks. But a browser needs to be able to know like whether or not. So if it hadn't encoded this, what would have happened is the browser would have said like, okay, open bracket, H1 close bracket. That's telling me, you know, as long as there's a corresponding closing bracket with a H1 in it, it's telling me like, hey, this is a headline. Let's make it a headline. So I'll make it bigger and bolder. But the browser also needs to be able to just display, you know, what if I just wanted to put some math equation and it had less thans and greater thans in it? So what happens is a security measure, or just to get functionality that isn't all wonky, it encodes it like this, and LT semicolon. And that's telling the browser, hey, just display the less than signal. Don't actually read this as what could potentially be a tag. So XSS, or cross-site scripting, is what happens when this isn't sanitized or encoded properly. You can actually inject JavaScript or HTML. You can get the browser to render other things. And the reason I said it's not valuable is because, like, let's say hypothetically I had some command I could enter, and if it rendered it in HTML, it made the computer explode. Like, it's super malicious. Well, all the server does is send us this file. All the rendering is being done client side or on our browser. So all that would happen is I would explode my own computer. Well, that's not very valuable. All I did was hack myself, essentially. So in order for it to be of value, we would need someone else to look at this page that had our malicious code on it and have it rendered on their computer. And the way that usually would work in a CTF or any of these challenges is they will have some kind of script running that goes and visits the web page to kind of simulate a user. And so you will see something like, oh, talk to our emu named Parrot, but because we've had problems with people getting the parrot to swear, all communication will first be approved by a moderator. And then that script running simulates the moderator who comes and looks at the page. And then your XSS has value because then you can exploit that moderator's computer. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, apparently I am going to ramble a lot because we've already been going for quite a while and I've done nothing. So we have the source code, and it looks like we're going to need it because there's not really kind of anything going on. It's a pretty simple site, pretty straightforward. Again, this is just JavaScript, so it's being rendered on our computer, but it's not sending a fetch request or doing anything. I'm actually going to try something. So one of the things to think about when you're doing these challenges is, like, we're lucky in that we know there's a vulnerability somewhere. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a flag to get. So we know there has to be something. And that something on a beginner challenge isn't immediately obvious. So we need to be thinking, like, okay, like, if there is a vulnerability and it doesn't look like we can do anything, like, what would that vulnerability be? Like, well, the server, the back end is like sending us this code, right? It's creating this HTML and sending to us. And one of the ways, there's what's called like templating engines, where kind of to help developers, I don't know if it's like a shortcut, but it makes a lot of things easier. And you can just sort of make a template and then have think of it like a variable. And so you could have it then, I guess actually the benefit is you can render more dynamic web pages because you can change things easier. I don't know. I'm not a developer, but essentially, like, templating engines are a thing that it helps developers and is used to create the web page that gets sent to you. Well, that is something that's being rendered on the server. So if we could figure out some kind of exploit that got the server to render that, then that's valuable because, right, it's a window into another computer. So I don't know what's being run, but one of the simplest ones is this. So these double curly braces is kind of like in the same way that HTML is like open and closing tags. Templating engines often use the double curly, and that's telling it, I guess I should see if it works before. Sweet. Now I look really smart. So what happened was the server took that input and it's using some kind of templating engine, and that told the server, like, hey, multiply 7 by 7 and enter the output. And so again, that is kind of maybe why templating engines are useful, is because, like, say we had, like, we could create a web page that was more dynamic in that, like, say when we logged in, it displayed our age or whatever. So then the code could be that, and I guess it's actually, so it's only rendering it. We'll have to look at the source code. So this was output correctly. And what's from the emu is actually being injected. Actually, let's just, I already opened up Sublime. Let's look at, I guess I have to do it again. Oh, I never downloaded it. Duh. Let's download the source code. And then we'll unzip it. Did I spell it wrong? Unzip. Oh, end of central directory not found. Not a zip file. Surely it's a zip. Oh, here's where I messed up. I did -o to output the file, but -o with wget is for logging, and O is for the name of the file. So now it should work. There we go. Now we have Sublime up already. Oops. So here's our source code. Oops. So we see we have templates. The flag is in a file, and then we have this is going to be what the source. So we're using Flask, which is a Python application. We're rendering so when we send a post request, render template index, and it's passing in the chat log. Oh, I don't know why I keep coming back to here. We have it in template. So here's kind of the templating. So on the server, this is the code that's being run, and then for speaker, message in chat log is getting passed in. If speaker equals user, and then speaker and message, and then N4. So it's not immediately obvious to me why one is being, so if speaker equals user message. Okay, so it's user message is getting input inside this. Otherwise, emu message. I don't know, whatever. Super helpful, isn't it? So basically we have template injection, which is, like I said, now we have a way to exploit something on the server. So I don't know off the top of my head what a payload would be. So what we're going to do is search for those server-side template injection payloads. And the good sites are usually, or the ones I'll try first, is like Hacktricks or Payload All the Things. And we're going to search for Flask, which I believe is, so Python's is Jinja 2. So you can see kind of all the different things that we could put in. This is kind of the stuff that the application gives access to. We're kind of looking, so we know the flag is in a file. So we want something that is either like allows us to read files or allows us to execute code, because then we could just use that code to read files. So like, let's try let's try this one. So this would be one for remote code execution, right? So it's using the various objects available to the templating engine to do a bunch of stuff to kind of eventually get access to something. In this case, like the import, and it's telling Python then to import the OS package. And then so it has access to this popen command. So then you can run the command and then read it, and then that's what's going to get output. So we're going to try this. So if this works, it should display what the ID is of the user that is running the web server. So we see it's the root user. So then what we can do is just change this command, right? So like if we wanted to, let's see what directory we were in. We should be in the app directory, probably. User source app. So then let's see what files are in there. One of them, spoiler alert, is going to be the flag. And then let's read that file. So we could just say cat flag, which is a Linux command that just says, hey, read the file and output it. And yay, there is our flag. So I probably talked way too long. The gist of it is this server is using a templating engine, and the user input is not being correctly sanitized, and the user then is able to pass in commands that the server will then accept as like actual commands, render those commands, and then include it in the output when it builds the HTML file. So we then can take that flag and solve the challenge. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's all I have to say about that one. Let's now jump into the next one. So let me close these. It looks like, again, we have source code and the site. Let's go to the site. We have another just kind of submit form. Again, since it's beginner, we're just going to look at the page source. Although I figure this one's probably a little harder than the last one. And the last one didn't have, you know, some comment with the flag in it. But, okay, I already know what this is going to be. So we see here, let's go ahead and download the source code. Capital O. I forget what it was called. We'll just call it, because it doesn't matter. And that key was just telling it to not display the output. And then we'll unzip. Okay. What was it called? Zoo feedback. Oh, we actually have a Docker file this time. So where was our site? From the source code, what I see is when we submit feedback, where is it? Button on clicks. So when we click the submit button, it's telling it to run this function, which is this JavaScript right here. And what's being created is, we can see there's some XML data. It looks like it's creating, so this backtick is a Java template literal. And what it's doing is it's saying create, all this is a string, and then this here is a variable. So it's gonna, in the place of $, curly brace, feedback, curly brace, it's going to actually put in a variable. And that variable is going to be that feedback. So it's going to put in whatever is in the document. So document is the, what's it called? So in HTML, there's the DOM, the document object model. I don't know. Anyway, it's the sort of like hierarchy of the everything that goes into building the web page. So one of the elements is of that web page is get element by ID. One of the IDs has a the ID of feedback, which if we go look somewhere, this text area element has the ID feedback, and currently its placeholder is enter your feedback here, which is what we should see there. Whatever we put in there, this function then is going to get that element. It's going to read the value that we entered in, and it's going to put it in this feedback element, which is then going to be stuck in this string. So It's a long way to basically say part of what we're entering, what we're sending to the server when we submit. So when we submit this function, it's going to send a fetch request as a way for JavaScript to instruct your browser to send a web request. It's going to make a post request with the application XML content type that tells the backend server, hey, the stuff you're about to read is going to be XML. And then in the body of that fetch request is going to be this XML data, which is the string we're building. And then it's going to get the response and display it in the element response, which we see is this element here. Anyway, what is being sent to the server is XML. And there is something called external, the XXE, what is it? XML external entity. Injection attack, I don't know. Anyway, basically in the same way the last one was using like template injection, where we could inject in some commands to have the templating engine render what we wanted it to do. With XML, it's kind of the same thing. There's XML commands we can enter that if they're not being sanitized or encoded or properly dealt with, that will give us the ability to basically do the same thing. We're basically doing the exact same thing as the first challenge. We're just doing it in a different way, different environment, different tools being used. Like that's one of the things about web exploitation is there's literally a billion different ways to do the same thing. So, and this isn't something that's as common anymore because XML, frankly, just kind of sucks. And so it's not being used as much. I'm sure there's like plenty of good reasons to use it, but basically, at least in my experience, I haven't seen it as much in websites anymore because it sucks. And basically, I think it sucks because it's just kind of a pain in the ass to read and stuff. Anyway, that's just one way to do the same thing. And if we look at the source code, so let me ramble about the source code. I guess I can just look in. So now we have this zoo feedback. So what we actually have here is a Docker file. And a Docker file is, especially like on Hack the Box and stuff, if you do a lot of those, they give you the source as a Docker file. A Docker file, there's a program called Docker, and it creates containers. Basically, it's kind of a pain in the ass when you say develop an application and you get it, applications now are so complex that they take in a bunch of different packages from different places and other things other people built, and there's all these different versions. And if you don't have the environment the exact same way, everyone's computers has a little bit different because of just the way you've installed stuff. Maybe you're on whatever package version 1.3, and for my application to work you need package 1.7. But then it gets even more complicated because maybe you have 1.7, but 1.7 conflicts with some other packages. It's a whole big mess. So kind of one of the things that was developed was something called Docker, where it's a way to basically build the exact computer you want and distribute that so that everybody is getting the exact things they need in order to run your application. So what we essentially have is the application, and we could run it if we want, but this Docker file is what tells the program Docker how to build up that application. So if we look at the Docker file, basically what it's doing is saying, use this is another Docker image. So it's just built on top of, we're basically taking the Python 3.9-slim image and we're adding some stuff to it or doing something to it. And we're not really doing much because this is pretty simple. We're just creating, basically you can think of it as a virtual machine or whatever, but we're creating an app directory, we're copying in stuff, we're running pip install requirements. This is going to tell it to, hey, install all these things. And then we're going to expose port 80, and this is the command that's going to, when Docker, that container starts up, it's going to run this command. Anyway, hopefully I didn't make that more confusing. Basically, just think of it as a way to build a computer that does a specific thing. And in this case, it's being specifically running this application. One of the cool things about the Docker file, or getting it as a Docker container, or Docker, the ability to build a container from the source code, is you could actually then run it locally on your own machine and have the exact, hypothetically, theoretically, the exact same code that's being run on the remote machine. So you can do all kinds of testing and debugging on your local machine that you can't do on the remote machine because you don't have access to change the source code or to see the errors that are being generated and stuff. So it's very helpful. Hopefully we don't need to use it for this, but if we go and look at the source code, we see this is this is a file that's basically handling, so any request that gets sent to the root, the web root, just the main backslash. If it's a get post or get request or a post request, it's being handled by this function, and we can see if it is a post request, the request data is getting stored in this variable, and then so it's using this, like how the last challenge was using a template engine to parse and do stuff. This one is using some XML parser from some package called LXML. I don't know if that's like a main package or what, or a popular one. And then so it's the same thing. And then Flask is rendering this template that's passing in. If there was an error in the XML parsing, it's passing in that error. And otherwise it's creating some HTML that's putting the feedback. So feedback element, I think it was from, so feedback. So it's creating the XML with this feedback node. I forget what the terminology is for XML. Anyway, there's some long story short. Geez, I ramble. Long story short is there's something called XXXXE, which is a vulnerability in XML if the input isn't being properly sanitized, which is a theme you're going to see over and over and over and over in web challenges, is user input not being properly sanitized or handled. Basically, developer isn't thinking about they're just thinking like, okay, someone's submitting some feedback. They're not thinking about, hey, someone could use this to do something, malicious. They're expecting to get feedback. So they're not thinking about like, why would someone put XML encoding into the feedback? But essentially, user input is where the vast majority of these are going to come from. Like the thing you should always be focused on when you're doing web challenges is find where you have input you can control, the user controllable input, and then follow it all the way through the code base if you have access to the code. Like something that's interacting with that is what is going to be was what's going to lead to a vulnerability that you can use to exploit. And in this case, we're passing user input directly into XML and into an XML string that is being directly passed into the parser. And a more complicated challenge may be this. Well, I'm assuming that they're not going to have it like this just because it's beginner, but essentially like maybe this package handles parsing or handles input and doesn't allow for or maybe the programmer actually handled input correctly for the vast majority of cases, but there's some bug in this package. There's a vulnerability in this package that if we give it the exact right input, it'll do something nobody's intending to happen, that it's going to allow us to exploit something. So more complicated challenges, there's often like filtering happening that you're trying to bypass, or you need to find what the vulnerability in the package is. But in this case, I'm just going to assume it's a straight up sort of beginner level XXXXE. Geez, I cannot say that. And so what we're going to essentially do is, let me think for a second. So normally we have control over this part of, here, let's actually submit something. I'm going to use a tool called Burp Suite, which is kind of like the de facto standard proxy, does all kinds of stuff. Essentially what is happening with Burp Suite is when we send something, our browser, it's sort of a man in the middle between our browser and the actual web server. So instead of our browser sending stuff directly to the web server and the web server sending stuff directly to our browser, Burp Suite has sort of stuck itself in the middle of that. So our browser is sending stuff to Burp Suite, and Burp Suite is then passing it along. And then that allows us to see everything that's happening. And the same way on the other way back, the server is sending it all to Burp Suite, and we can see what it all looks like, and then it's being passed to our browser. So if we go to the website in our Burp Suite tool, so this is the browser that Burp Suite uses, and we can see, so feedback, blah, blah, blah. These are the requests it's sending. So like we sent a GET request. So this here is what we sent initially to the browser or to the web server to load the web page. This is what the web server sent back, right? It's got the communication stuff between the server and the browser, like the HTTP codes, the response headers, and then here's the actual HTML itself for the browser to render. And then when we sent our request to the server, this is what our browser sent, which was all these headers, and then here is the actual payload. And see, when we entered in on the screen all that gibberish, it got input into this part of the string right there, which we saw. Where did I have that? We saw right here, right? It is putting it into here. So like if we only use the browser to do this challenge, we could only control what goes in between feedback. But to actually exploit this, we need to do some other stuff. But because it's sending all this, we actually have control over all that. We just have to use a tool to be able to manipulate that. So here's the request that got sent. And what I'm going to do is use a tool in Burp Suite called the repeater. So I'm going to send this request to repeater, and it allows me from Burp Suite to just adjust it and do stuff here. So I can like send another request. So this isn't, the browser now has, no knowledge of this. Like this is being sent directly from Burp Suite to the server, and then we're seeing what's sent back. So if we only use the browser, we can only control what was in here, but we want to control what is, I want to add some stuff on the outside of this. And we're going to do, again, we're just going to Google for it, XXE payloads. And we'll use something from like Hack Tricks usually is where I go. Portswigger. So Portswigger is who makes Burp Suite, and their site is actually like phenomenal. Like highly recommend. Here, we'll go on a little side quest here. Portswigger has labs and tons of information, and if you want to learn web hacking, make an account here and start doing labs. So they're explaining what XML, so that's what XXE is as XML, external entity injection. Talks about how it works, how do they arise. It gives you, the different types of them. And then it gives you labs to practice on, and all these labs actually also give you like solutions. It's just it's a really great tool. So let's go ahead and I'll just, instead of, oh, did it not? Here, I'll just open one of these to demonstrate. So we're gonna say payload all the things. Gonna give you a bunch of payloads that you might want to try, but I'm just going to use, because I saw the one I wanted on Burp Suite. Where did it go? we're just going to use a really simple one. Here we go. So what we're essentially doing, so I'm not like, I don't know all that much about XML. Like I said, it's not used that much anymore, so I don't have a lot of experience with it, but we're basically creating this external entity. We're naming it XXE, and what it's doing is it's telling the XML parser or whatever to, hey, this when you see this command, I want you to go read file, the etc password file on the machine. So what we would do then is do in this element, then we're going to say this element execute that command. This might not be the best explanation of it. Again, like I said, I'm not. Okay, what did we do? Why did that? I feel like that should have worked. Did I not? We have doc type. Oh, we have an entity, XSE. It's reading system file, etc password. We closed that off. It's in our expecting. I don't remember what 39 is. Expecting a semicolon. What did I do wrong? Oops. Maybe I accidentally deleted something I wasn't aware of. Yeah, so that's apparently what I did. I fat fingered something. So we know that one works. So I'm just putting that in. Oh, and now I need to tell it to do that command. And it's not working. Maybe there is. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Let me go back and read what it's supposed to do. Oh, literally it told me what I needed to do. When I do the command, I need to have a semicolon at the end of it, which is literally what the error was telling me. It's expecting a semicolon at line 4 at the end. Anyway, that's what I did wrong. And we see that now this is the etc password file on that computer. So instead of having it read etc password, we could have it read the flag, which is what we're going to do. If I can remember where the flag was. So in the Docker file, it tells us it created \app and then copied everything in there. So it should just be under app flag. I don't remember if it was flag text or flag. We'll try. Oops. App flag.txt. And see, there we go. We got the file. So basically, kind of a very fundamentally, it's the same challenge both times. It's just happening in a different way. And what you'll see is that's what a lot of challenges are, is essentially almost all web exploits are the same, where it's just user input being handled incorrectly or not sanitized enough, or interacting with something that gives us an ejection. And so, like, one of the things I think is hard if you're starting out, God only knows if anyone's still listening to this because it's been going on for a while, but my biggest thing I would tell you if you're a beginner is to not watch, or definitely watch videos like this and learn. And like I said, go to Portswigger. Their stuff is phenomenal. But it's really, really easy to see other people doing things and then feeling overwhelmed by it. Like, how am I supposed to learn that there's all these things? How am I supposed to learn these commands? And like, there's just so much stuff. And it can feel like you're never going to get to the place where you know all these things. Well, one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this live was to like, so again, I'm not an expert or anything, but like my actual job that I make my money and like feed myself and clothe myself with is doing web application pen testing. So like I have enough experience to get a job. Like I've got, certifications, like I know what I'm doing in the sense that like I'm way farther along in the path of gaining knowledge than a beginner. And I'm way far enough along that path that I'm decent at it and I can make a living do it. I'm still light years from some of these people who are like really, really good at it. But what I'm saying is, I guess I would be the level of what a lot of people are trying to aspire to when they get into it. Like if they want to be good enough at it that they could get a job, that they can, understand what's going on. And it's really easy then to see people like me do these challenges and be like, I'm never going to learn all this. But like one of the reasons I wanted to do it live was look what I had to do. Like, I don't know how to do XXE. I barely even knew what it stood for. I definitely didn't remember this off the top of my head. The other challenge with the template injection, I didn't remember all the syntax of how to open to get the, Python OS to import. And there's like tons of different languages. Really, what you're doing is just sort of learning what's out there, what is possible, understanding the fundamentals of it, understanding like, okay, this is what the server's doing. This is kind of how application flow works. This is, being able to read code and like you have an idea of what's going on. The things that are possible. And then you just freaking use Google or Chat GPT or whatever, because it is, sure, there's probably people who live and breathe this stuff and who are way smarter than I am, who can just remember all this and could tell you to a much deeper level what all this is. And at various points in time, I've learned a lot of this stuff to deeper levels, working on a specific challenge that's like really hard and I have to like learn more about it. But all that, you can't retain all that forever. Like unless you're doing XML stuff constantly, you're going to forget most of it. What sticks behind is like, okay, like this kind of thing is possible. I sort of have a like vague understanding of it, and I can read application code and do these things to see like, okay, that's going to be vulnerable to this. And then like, don't worry about the fact that there's all of this stuff. You only got to know, just peripherally be aware of these things and have an understanding of how it all kind of like interconnects, and you'll be able to like handle everything else with like Google and stuff. So basically what I'm saying is I've seen a lot of people get down or get overwhelmed by how much they think there is that they're going to have to know before they'll ever even be remotely competent. And I'm just saying, like, hopefully I fumbled around enough, like, trying to get an error to work or whatever. You can see like, no, like you don't really gotta be that smart or that good. You just need some experience. So just like, put your butt in the chair and log some hours doing some stuff. And so hopefully, I mean, clearly that's what you want to be doing because you're here watching this video and still listening to me ramble. So you clearly have the desire. So just put that to practice now. Go out, go join Portswigger, read some stuff. Don't worry about trying to be an expert on everything. Just start doing. And eventually it's like throwing mud on a wall. Like most of it falls off, but if you just keep throwing mud on a wall, you can tell I'm from like Hickville where we didn't have much to do but throw mud at walls when I was growing up. But like eventually the wall is covered in mud, even though 95% of it fell off. And that's basically what you're doing when you're doing challenges, learning things. You're just throwing information at your brain, and most of it's going to fall off, but you just keep throwing and you just keep throwing. And eventually you can get to the point where like you can start to do stuff. And yeah, I know. I guess that's what I'll leave you with. And if you still are here for some reason and got something out of this, like I'd super appreciate it if you thought about liking or subscribing. And maybe I'll try and do some of the other web challenges, try and make a more concise video about them. And yeah, I don't know. Take care.